The first order of business, now that I have my RV, is to shop for a heater. I have severe Reynaud and also really bad fibromyalgia, and so if I'm not in a very, very warm room, it actually becomes life-threatening. I could lose a hand or a foot. So having heat other than a typical RV furnace is going to be an absolute must for me. It's got to be something that does not need electricity and can turn on without electric ignite and stay warm without electricity. So I started looking about, I would say, a year ago. It took me 2 months of days of phone calls and looking around the internet and just all the work you could ever imagine to try to find a heater. And the first thing I encountered was something like what you see on my computer screen now. I found this heater. I called several dealers to try to find a place that carried it. As it turns out, this heater doesn't really even exist. I think it does in some South American country, but for the most part it's not something that exists where you can get it in the U.S. I looked and looked. I spent days trying to find it and couldn't. This is a vented propane heater. It puts out 1700 BTUs. That would be a good size for like the living room of an RV, and then maybe something smaller in the bedroom. But I couldn't find it. I found several heaters that were similar to this. Couldn't find it. They were only prototypes, and they didn't exist. Now, another item that was pretty much recommended on the internet was this. The Black Cat heater. It's a vented propane heater. It really truly does exist, but as it turns out, the largest one has a BTU of 5200. If you put that in the living room of your RV and another one in the bedroom of your RV, you're going to freeze. For me, it would cost me a hand and a foot. So it's just, again, not worth it. That wasn't going to work out. And in the tiny home ads, I saw several of the, houses, tiny home videos everywhere that had this particular heater. It's the Dickinson Marine heater. And it looks pretty good. There's no electronic ignition required. You just light it, and it looks beautiful. It's a beautiful fireplace. But again, I ran into that same issue. It only puts out a little over 5,000 BTUs. Again, that's not going to be hot enough for an RV. RVs need a lot more extra heat because the insulation is so poor. And some of the people with tiny homes have found that this isn't even enough. So, for example, for a 20-foot RV, you'd need at least 4 of these, if not more. Basically, how it's been explained to me, in an RV, for every foot of RV, you need 1,000 BTUs. So if you've got a 30-foot RV, you need 30,000 BTUs. If you have a 5-foot RV, then 25,000 BTUs. So this really is beautiful. It's not cheap either. Like here on this website, they're giving like a real deal, and it's $788.85, and that's a lot cheaper than most places have it. And then you got to think that installation can be between $500 and $800. And that was the issue I ran into. I called everywhere in New Mexico that did work on RVs and tried to find out about getting it installed. And they will not install this. This is just way too much work for them. They have to cut through the ceiling, make a vent, and all that. And I actually did find one dealer in Alamogordo that was willing to do this kind of work. And again, like I say, it would be $800 approximately. Now, what the dealers in New Mexico were willing to install were like wall heaters that weren't vented. Those are not really a good option for anyone. Many people have died using these kinds of heaters, the catalytic unvented heaters, because they put out heavy carbon monoxide, they take the oxygen from the air, and for somebody needing a lot of heavy heat and it's going to be on a long time, not an option. I've heard of people using the Mr. Buddy heater and having that on all night and ending up with, say, a pretty bad headache in the morning. Not good. And here again on eBay is some more examples of the catalytic heaters that they're pushing so heavily here in New Mexico because they're easy to install. You just slap them on the wall and hook up the propane and you're ready to go. No extra work, no fancy work required. And that's just not good. They just want to charge you a ton of money to do this lazy. But Alamo RV will install the vented kind of heater where they have to cut it out and do it, but it is quite a pretty price. Now, since last year and all the months that I worked last year trying to, find a heater, the end of my search last year netted me this heater. This is a Regency Hampton H27 heater. It puts out, about, in the end, it's H27 because it's supposed to be 27,000 BTUs, but the propane model doesn't put out as much as the natural gas, and by the time you talk about efficiency, it ends up down at 23,000 BTUs. And last year I was thinking how pretty it would be, this gray model, because it would go so good with my black and gray. And I originally found this on a tiny home video where they had used this in a tiny home because the Dickinson wasn't going to be enough, and it has very low clearance to the wall. It can fit in really, really tight spaces, unlike most other heaters of this type. So I looked at it and thought, wow, this would be perfect. And just because of the BTUs and the fact it would fit into a small space and be enough heat. I didn't even look at what it looked like. I didn't really care, as long as it was going to be enough heat for my home. That's all that really mattered, and enough that I would be safe and not compromise my health by not having enough heat. So I decided then that that's what I would go with when I found an RV. So upon finding my RV, well, actually, let me backtrack a little more. Last year I called around to places in New Mexico that sold this heater. They seemed like I interrupted them. They seemed kind of upset that I called asking about the heater. They didn't want to help me, didn't want to sell it to me. Told me to call back another time. All kinds of excuses on why they couldn't sell the heater. They were busy right now. Call another day. I would call another day, and they would say, well, call back, 2 more days from now. They didn't want to help me, so I called Regency, told them what I was doing, and they referred me. They said, well, since you're thinking of living in Arizona, why don't you just go buy it over there, and maybe you could have it installed over there as well. And so I called a couple of stores in Arizona, one in Tucson and one in Phoenix. Both were helpful. So this time I found the RV and decided that this was going to be the heater, because I'd already done months and months of research, and decided to buy it from one of the stores in Arizona, which is what I'm doing, and they're going to ship it to the service center in where my work is being done currently in Arizona. So it's perfect, and you get a little less on the shipping because it's a lot closer to drop freight it to Arizona than to New Mexico. And not to mention, the store in Arizona is quite a bit cheaper than any of them that I talked to in New Mexico or El Paso, Texas, nearby. I guess they didn't want my business. The ones in Arizona were quite glad to have my business. And this is not a cheap stove. It's very expensive. I tried to find another way around it, but really couldn't. This was really all I could do. This is probably the most expensive thing that I'm buying. The most expensive part of the whole process. It's probably 3 times the price of my solar system. It definitely cost more than the RV did. And actually, after I ordered it, I came to find out that this is like really a pretty stove. The man that's going to install it, actually one service center in Arizona was going to install it, but the man who's doing the work on the roof kind of fought me for the business, and he told me, he asked me if I've ever seen the heater in person. I said, well, I've seen it online, but no, I've never seen it in person. And he told me that it's really, really a beautiful, beautiful stove. And I clicked on this video on the site after I ordered it and came to realize, like, wow, this is a really beautiful stove. And wanting to do the bohemian design and decor in my trailer now, I kind of was thinking, well, maybe I'll go with the brown, but my stuff really isn't selling, and I may be stuck with the black and gray, and the gray model will go with anything, so that's the one that I ordered, and that's the one that's being shipped. And they told me, well, it's about 3 or 4 weeks for shipment, and that's kind of a concern, because if the new landlords decide that they're not going to want to give me more time, that's going to kind of leave me really stuck. But I went ahead with it and decided that I'm going to wait for 3 to 4 weeks to have it shipped, and I'll be getting the charcoal gray model with a basic thermostat. It won't have the remote control that you see out there, and it won't have any fancy frills, but it'll have the basic thermostat that will keep me in heat that I need. So that's going to be the new heat for my off-grid RV.